Well, good evening. Good to see y'all tonight. Good time of worship and prayer, and thankful for that. Let me just mention, I know some of you are new, weren't here last week, so you will find lessons over here. There's a sign that says handouts, and that's this week's lesson. If you miss a week or several weeks, whatever, and you want back lessons, you will find those in the file folder just to the right of the white table. We will keep student lessons there. We also are streaming these sessions online, so if you've got COVID symptoms, would you please stay home and watch it online? Otherwise, you come and be with us, okay? But we're streaming it there for those that cannot get out, and then it will remain recorded online. So if you miss a week, you can go there. You can also download a copy of the student lesson, or you can get a student lesson here, and then you can listen in and hear the teaching and fill in all the answers and get caught up. So we're trying to keep it where no matter what comes along, you can be a part of every session if that's what you would like to do. Then also, remember, we have a new way of doing questions. You'll see a little tent folder on your table. If you have a question, you may text that question to Brother Jeremy. His phone number is right there, and he will put those in some semblance of order and feed those to me at the end. If you don't text, you can write it on one of the blank cards, and while we're beginning to do the Q&A, Brother Jeremy will pick those up from you. Okay? All right. Tonight we are looking at, does God exist, and how can we know? Well, folks, across the centuries, people of faith have drawn on many different rational arguments to try to offer logical proof or reasonable evidence of the existence of God to unbelievers, to try to share with them some things that will help them to know that God is real, that God does exist. Some of these arguments were made from deductive logic, and others were drawn from empirical evidence. And while each of these had its own strengths and weaknesses, there is a method of apologetic that is offered in the Scriptures, so that when we find this in the Scriptures, it tells us a good methodology for us to use in sharing with others, because it's a methodology that God Himself has chosen. And we find this in a number of passages, but in three principal ones: in Romans 1, 18 to 20, Psalm 19, 1 to 6, and Job chapters 38 to 41. So I want to share those with you, but because we find this methodology for sharing an answer to difficult questions in the Scriptures, that can give us real confidence in using it. So let's read some of these key passages. First, Romans 1. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who suppress the truth in unrighteousness, because what may be known of God is manifest in them, for God has shown it to them. For since the creation of the world, His invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even His eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. So the things about God are clearly seen through the things that He has made. It's the message of this portion of Romans 1. Then Psalm 19. David wrote this. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows his handiwork. Day unto day utters speech, and night unto night reveals knowledge. There is no speech nor language where their voice is not heard. Their line has gone out through all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. Let me just pause there. He's saying the testimony that comes just by looking at the heavens and what God has made and his setting of the stars and the planets and the various heavenly bodies there, that this is a voice that transcends every language. Doesn't matter what language you speak. You can look up and see the message. How many times have you been where you looked at the night sky and in beholding that beauty, you just said, there must be a God? You know, well, that is the natural response of everyone who sees that. The heavens declare the glory of God. And then in Job 38, the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, who is this who darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Now prepare yourself like a man. I will question you, and you shall answer me. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me, if you have understanding, who determined its measurements? We will see that question is one of great importance in the weeks to come. Tell me, if you have understanding, who determined its measurements? Surely you know. Or who stretched the line upon it? To what were the foundations fastened? Or who laid its cornerstone? When the morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God shouted for joy. And then in the next chapter, in Job 39, do you know the time when the wild mountain goats bear young? Or can you mark when the deer gives birth? Can you number the months that they fulfill? Or do you know the time when they bear young? They bow down, they bring forth their young. They deliver their offspring. Their young ones are healthy. They grow strong with grain. They depart and do not return to them. Talking about the mystery of new life, the mystery of new birth. He's saying, Job, do you really even understand that? When you see that miracle, what do you know about it? Then Job 40. Look now at Behemoth, which I made along with you. He eats grass like an ox. See how his strength is in his hips and his power is in his stomach muscles. He moves his tail like a cedar. The sinews of his thighs are tightly knit. His bones are like beams of bronze, his ribs like bars of iron. He is the first of the ways, or the first of the things that have been shaped by God. Do you know what he's talking about there? He's talking about a dinosaur. He's talking about some dinosaur like the Brachiosaurus, the Brontosaurus, one that lives in the marshes, but he moves his tail like a cedar, like a massive cedar log. His sinews of his thighs are tightly knit, his bones like beams of bronze. And he says, God made him. Now, this apologetic that we find in Scripture can be simply called the evidence of design. In the last 2 decades, it's often been called intelligent design. Philosophers for many, many centuries have called it the teleological argument. So if you're reading some fancy philosophy, that's what you'll find in the book there. But the argument for this is simple, and we all understand it. It simply is that the universe shows too much evidence of order and design to have been generated just by random processes. This much design can only be present because it was designed. And God is the only reasonable choice for someone or something sufficient for such a design. Now, let me just share with you 4 thoughts about this. The first one is that the principle of argument of intelligent design for the existence of God, this is an argument that is actually accepted by everyone. And you say, oh, well, I know somebody who doesn't. Listen, follow with me just a minute. Because I believe that you will see everybody actually operates by this principle. Now, here's a picture on the screen of a stone eagle on top of an amethyst geode. Now, if you could examine that eagle, you would find that the eagle is also made of stone. Now, both the amethyst and the eagle are beautiful. Both of them are complex. However, you could believe that a prospector just found the geode in nature. He didn't do anything to it except just pick the amethyst up. But no one would believe that the stone eagle could happen naturally. You look at that and you find out it's made of stone, and everybody would say that was carved. Somehow that was carved. It was made out of stone, but somebody made that. In fact, they looked at it, they might ask you, who made that? And why do people why would they ask that question? Why would someone not look at that stone eagle and say, how did that just happen to come be that way? Or how long did it take for that to be formed by random chance? You know, if somebody asked you that question, you'd be sorely tempted to think, stupid. I mean, it's just not even a natural thought. We look at a piece of stone that has been shaped like an eagle, and we know somebody had to do that. How do we know that? Why is that true? Because the design and the order in the carved statue is immediate and sufficient evidence to every single one of us that somebody made that. And what we can draw from this is that the presence of design and order is something that is universally accepted as irrefutable evidence of a designer. Now, on a common level, if you were in college, your humanities professor, who happens to be an ardent evolutionist, held up a painting from the Renaissance and asked, okay, class, who painted this? Try responding. No one. It just happened. No, on second thought, don't do that. That would not be kind. It would not be wise. Don't try that. But if you did, you know, the reaction would vary in the class from disgust to frivolity, because everybody, including any atheists that are present, would consider your answer ludicrous. Nobody would look at a painting from the Renaissance and just say, oh, well, that just happened. If a prospective member came to our church, and let's go back to remembering our auditorium when it was pre-Hurricane Michael. And it's going to be that beautiful and more one of these days. We're getting there. But they stand outside, they look at our auditorium, And they said, Pastor, how'd y'all build this building? What if I said, well, we took a big stack of pilings, several thousand bags of concrete mix, truckloads of sand, barrels of water, dozens of pallets of brick, and a whole bunch of steel studs. Stacks and stacks of drywall, 100 buckets of paint, some rolls of carpet, a couple of control boards, some rolls of wire, a bunch of light fixtures, some sound speakers, microphones. We stacked it all up on top of 10 sticks of dynamite. And we lit a long fuse. One day we lit the fuse and boom, everything fell into place. Well, if that's what I said, he would for sure find him a different church, because this has got the craziest preacher he's ever met. And if he didn't leave, but he said to me, how many tries did it take? I might give him the address of another church. Folks, my point in all of this is nobody thinks like that. Nobody thinks like that. You know, we know enough about living in this world that we know when we can see order and complexity in something, if it looks designed, it's because it is. It is designed, and that design means a designer. The very existence of a painting is evidence of a painter. The very presence of a building means there was a builder. Design and order are universally accepted as evidence of a designer. And let me tell you, in Romans, the point that is being made in the overall passage there is not just that the evidence of God's creation, that you can see all these things that are made, which says somebody made that and points them to a creator. It not only is a testimony to them, but the point in Romans is it's such a strong testimony that those who reject it, God holds responsible for the rejection. He says that is evidence enough. If you don't have anything else, that is enough that if you reject the idea that there is a God who made it all, then you are guilty of rejecting God himself. And that's the point of that section in Romans 1. Now, folks, let me say this is true even among scientists and evolutionists. Let me ask you, where would you find more scientists who believe in evolution than among those scientists who are involved in the search for extraterrestrial intelligent life? As this group of evolutionists aim their antennas at different parts of the sky and feed their radio signals back into their computers, what are they listening for? What are they hoping to hear? What are they spending millions of dollars of government money listening for? For a signal that has some kind of order. Because they know that if they find a signal that has some kind of order in it, it will mean that someone sent it. If they ever get something beyond random noise, it will mean someone sent it. The evidence that nobody denies is order and design. Even those who would argue with this very statement on a practical day-by-day level, they operate by this principle. Order and design are irrefutable evidence of a designer. And folks, we live in a world, in a universe that is filled with design and order. There's the obvious things like look at any plant, beautiful green leaves, but no two of them are identical. But every one of the leaves in a given plant are symmetrical to all the others. You look at the blossom, rich in color, made of overlapping petals, each one perfectly placed, so clearly purposed to be part of the whole. The design and order in the animal world is even much more pronounced than in the world of plants. I remember when my boys were in middle school, they had pet raccoons. We raised them from just babies out of the nest. And I never think about them without remembering those clear little masks over their eyes. How especially appropriate. They were bandits at heart. I mean, if something was shiny or jingly, boy, they wanted it and resolute to not give it back. But not only is there just the surface stuff that you can look at and see tremendous order and design, but the deeper you know something, some product or some substance, the more you know about it, the more the order and design is revealed. Let me just give you one example of that. Substances can exist naturally in four forms. It can be a gas, a plasma, a liquid, or solid. You take a chunk of solid iron and you heat it hot enough, it becomes a liquid. Now, almost all substances, when they pass in their form from a gas to a liquid to a solid, increase in density. They increase in density. In other words, for any given volume, they get heavier. They weigh more. So if you started with a huge mass of iron and you heated some of it up for it to become a liquid, and then you heated some of the liquid hot enough to be a gas and you encased it all, it would naturally separate itself so the gas is on top, the liquid is in the middle, the solid is on the bottom. Okay? And that is true of almost every substance that exists in all three states of solid, liquid, and gas. Plasma is a different kind of being. That's true for almost every substance except water. Except water. Water's different. When you freeze solid water and it becomes ice, its density decreases. And that's why ice floats in your tea. That's why ice floats in your glass of water at the restaurant. And you say, well, that's cute, that's neat. It's more neat. This unique property of water is one of the things that makes the earth inhabitable. If water sank when it froze, as every other substance does, then the earth would become a solid, icy globe. Because as the water froze, like in the Arctic and the Antarctic region in winter, rather than floating where the sun can reach it and continue to warm it ultimately, especially as it moves south, melt it back into water, if it sank, it would go to the depths of the ocean and eventually the ice would accumulate until the entire oceans were frozen, and ultimately with it, the rest of the planet. If water didn't have that unique property, none of us would be here. Now let me show you this. Not just tell you, I'm going to show you this. Even evolutionist scientists acknowledge this principle. First of all, every scientist proves every day that the universe is filled with order and design. Each day they do their scientific work, they are either using or looking for some scientific law. Now, what's a scientific law? A scientific law is a statement of a pattern, a description of the way something always works because of its inherent order. If this world were instead filled with randomness, if instead of order and design everywhere, everything was just random, you never knew what it was going to do. You never knew how something was going to turn out. You could throw a ball up one day and it came down and bounced. You threw it up another day, it just kept on going. If it was just random. But it's not random. And the presence of order and design in place of randomness is the whole reason we have science. If it were all random, no experiment would ever come out the same. No theory could ever be proved. But that's not the way it is. The very existence of the discipline we call science is proof of the order found everywhere in the universe. Stephen Hawking was considered by his evolution-loving peers as the world's most brilliant cosmologist. Although he was confined to a wheelchair and unable to speak due to Lou Gehrig's disease, his intellect was often compared to that of Albert Einstein. Using a computer voice to voice the words he painstakingly selected with a pointing device mounted on the arm of his wheelchair, Hawking has probably done more to further belief in the Big Bang Theory than any other person in the world. But do you know what Hawking said was his number one goal, his number one professional goal? He wanted to discover and state the unified theory. The unified theory is the formula that unites the theories of each of the four fundamental forces of the universe: gravity, electromagnetism, the strong force, and the weak force. The formulation and verification of the unified theory would be the crown jewel of physics, and Stephen Hawking was on its quest. But I want you to think about this for a minute. What does that say about Dr. Hawking? That means that the world's most brilliant and ardent evolutionist admits with his very own life's purpose that this entire universe is one of design. The very man who attributes the origin of all things to randomness lived his life extracting knowledge of the order of the universe from its pages. Let me tell you about the end of his life. The Guardian, which most of you probably are familiar with, but it's a left-leaning British newspaper. 2 months after Dr. Hawking died around March in 2018, they published an opinion piece with the title, "Did the dying Stephen Hawking really mean to strengthen the case for God?" Hawking had throughout his career championed the multiverse theory to explain the extremity of order that he and others observed in our one known universe. His idea was there's an infinite number of universes. And if there's an infinite number of universes, then it's just by chance that we're in the universe that has everything right to make life. And the others don't, but we do, and there's just so many. One of them has to be this way. That was his theory. Now, but his final paper, published shortly before his death, Hawking and co-author Thomas Hertog formulated strict limits to the kind of universes that could populate a multiverse. And they determined they all had to have the same scientific laws. In terms of supporting atheism, the Guardian said, this is not a step forward, but a step back. Folks, that's why I insist the evidence is undeniable. The world and the universe are filled with order and design. And irrefutably, order and design prove the existence of a designer. The overwhelming evidence of design leaves ardent atheists grasping at straws. Sir Fred Hoyle was a famous astronomer at Cambridge, overlapping for a season with Stephen Hawking. He, like so many other scientists, observed the extensive design of the universe, saw that design define the laws of probability to come into existence by mere chance. He was especially overwhelmed by the existence of life. And Hoyle, now not a believer, but Hoyle wrote this: would you not say to yourself, some super calculating intellect must have designed the properties of the carbon atom? Otherwise, the chance of my finding such an atom through the blind forces of nature would be utterly minuscule. A common sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super intellect has monkeyed with physics as well as chemistry and biology, and that there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. The numbers one calculates from the facts seem to me so overwhelming as to put this conclusion almost beyond question. Those are the words of Fred Hoyle himself. Sadly, Hoyle and many others did not follow the evidence that lead them to believe in a personal God who created everything. Instead, Hoyle also postulated some super intelligent alien culture which developed life and seeded it on our planet. And there are many scientists drowning in an ocean of evidence, clinging to the same straws, trying to keep their heads above water. Some of you will remember the well-known Dr. Carl Sagan, used to be very popular on television in his program Cosmos, who also found extraterrestrials to be more plausible than God. Such men and women seem deaf to the question, okay, then who made the extraterrestrials? At least philosopher Thomas Nagel of New York University was honest. He said, I want atheism to be true, and am made uneasy by the fact that some of the most intelligent and well-informed people I know are religious believers. It isn't just that I don't believe in God and naturally hope there is no God. I don't want there to be a God. I don't want the universe to be like that. Let me end by telling you a good story that shows the power of this intelligent design apologetic. Alan Rex Sandage is considered one of the greatest cosmologists in the world. He was a protege of the legendary Edward Hubble, after whom the Hubble telescope was named. Sandage has been awarded a multitude of honors by American, British, and Swiss astronomical societies, and the New York Times labeled him the grand old man of cosmology. Sandage was a Jew by ethnicity, but an atheist by conviction. But in 1985, at a conference on science and religion, Standage took his stand with the theist and declared that he had not only come to a belief in God as the creator of the universe, but he had also become a Christian. He stunned the audience with his announcement that he believed the formation of the universe was supernatural, that it was an event that cannot be explained within the realm of physics as we know it. He said that the sudden emergence of matter, space, time, and energy pointed to the need of some kind of transcendence. Let me quote his words. "It was my science that drove me to the conclusion that the world is much more complicated than can be explained by science. It was only through the supernatural that I can understand the mystery of existence." Many have been the unbelievers who have come to see the light and then discover the truth of Scripture by considering the design and order that God has made. Now, next week, we're going to continue with the question, does God exist? But over the next 3 weeks, we're going to look at evidence from 3 fields. Next week, we'll look at the evidence from astronomy, which is absolutely fascinating. Don't worry if you're not a scientist. Only a few in this room are, and I'm not one. But what we look at is perfectly intelligible by us, and it's shareable by us with others. So next week, the evidence from astronomy, the heavens declare the glory of God. All right, I know Jeremy sent me a question because my stand-up here has been vibrating like this. Couldn't hardly read the words from